Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills. I'm Dr. Bob Lawrence. It's time to discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Today is a great opportunity. Great opportunity for us to pump the brakes, exhale, and reflect upon our efforts since the start of the year. It's a time for us to retreat, regroup, if you will, right? So that when we put the wheels back in motion next month and begin tackling a new tune, we will do so with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding, and commitment to tune learning. A renewed belief in our ability to successfully apply essential jazz piano skills to the tune that we want to learn. It's hard to believe that we have already thoroughly studied 4 jazz standards since the start of the year. In January, we started with the Harry Warren classic, There Will Never Be Another You. We then turned our attention to Back Home Again in Indiana, followed by one of my all-time favorite ballads, These Foolish Things. And this month, we dissected the iconic Henry Mancini, Johnny Mercer standard, The Days of Wine and Roses. With each of these jazz standards, we utilized a 3-tier approach to discover, learn, and play the tune. Tier 1, we focused on a harmonic analysis. Tier 2, a melodic analysis. And Tier 3, improvisation development. Harmony, melody, improvisation. I think it's the perfect 1, 2, 3 punch needed to be able to, with confidence, actually claim that you know a tune. As I have said in previous podcast episodes, the great thing about our 3-tier approach, harmony, melody, improvisation, to studying tunes, is that it quickly reveals our strengths and weaknesses regarding various essential jazz piano skills. The essential jazz piano skills, I might add, needed in order to successfully learn and play a tune. And how important is that? That we know our jazz piano skills' strengths and weaknesses. Well, I'll tell you how important it is. There's no way to improve our playing without having an accurate understanding or assessment of our playing, of our skills. Our 3-tier approach to discover, learn, and play tunes does exactly that. It gives us a very clear picture, and very quickly, I might add, where we stand with our ability to play critical jazz piano skills. Having a process, a sequential order, a systematic approach to learning how to play jazz piano and learning how to play tunes is an absolute must. We shouldn't be surprised, right? I mean, after all, how can you master any high-level skill without a strategic game plan? I can confidently guarantee you that a YouTube approach to trying to learn how to play jazz piano will only cause frustration, confusion, and eventually surrender. So my goal with jazz piano skills, and it's been my goal since day one back in 2019, has been not only to introduce you to the essential jazz piano skills, discover, but to provide you with a way to successfully study the jazz piano skills, learn, and a process for developing a physical command of the jazz piano skills, play. Hence, discover, learn, and play. It's important to say, and I've stressed it many times since the start of the year, that if you have been a faithful jazz piano skills listener since 2019, you've become intimately familiar with the jazz piano skills needed to begin tune study. And I've also mentioned that if you haven't been grinding along with us over the past 4 years, it's no big deal, no worries. It's a great time right now to jump on board to begin developing and enhancing your jazz piano skills. The tune study that we do every month will help you sift through and prioritize the last 4 years of podcast episodes so that you can begin maximizing your jazz piano skills and immediately. So if you're a jazz piano skills veteran, or if you're a jazz piano skills rookie, makes no difference. You're in the right place at the right time to begin a jazz piano journey that will have a very profound impact on your understanding of music and, of course, on your jazz piano playing. So here is the game plan for today. Today, you are going to discover what I call jazz standards, a DLP, Discover, Learn, Play synopsis. Jazz standards, a DLP synopsis. You're going to learn how to prioritize the various essential jazz piano skills. And you are going to play effective practice approaches for the jazz piano skills. So as I always like to say, regardless of where you are in your jazz journey, a beginner, an intermediate player, or even advanced player, or even if you consider yourself a seasoned and experienced, crusty old professional, you're going to find this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson devoted to the presentation of jazz standards, a DLP synopsis, to be invaluable, liberating, and dare I say, comforting. But before we get started, I want to, as I always do, welcome first-time listeners to Jazz Piano Skills. If you are a new listener to the Jazz Piano Skills podcast, or if you're just new to Jazz Piano Skills in general, I want to personally invite you to become a Jazz Piano Skills member. Your membership grants you access to the premium content for this podcast episode and for every weekly podcast episode. And premium content will help you thoroughly and correctly discover, learn, and play the jazz standard that we are currently exploring. And as the old saying goes, a whole lot more. For example, as a Jazz Piano Skills member, you can access the past, the current, the future educational weekly podcast packets. These are the illustrations, the lead sheets, the play-alongs, all right, the backing tracks that I design and develop to help you get the most out of each weekly Jazz Piano Skills podcast episode. You also have access to a self-paced and sequential jazz piano curriculum, which is loaded with comprehensive courses containing educational talks, interactive learning media. There are video demonstrations in all 12 keys, the jazz piano skills being taught, and so much more. You also have a reserved seat, as I like to say, in my online weekly masterclass, which is held every Thursday evening. Now, if you cannot attend, it's no big deal. It's no problem. Masterclasses are recorded, and you can watch the video and rewatch the video of the class whenever and as often as you wish. As a Jazz Piano Skills member, you also have access to an online interactive fakebook containing must-know jazz standards with excellent chord changes, chord scale relationships, harmonic function analysis, listening suggestions, and historical insights. As a Jazz Piano Skills member, you can hang out with some old friends, make some new friends in the private Jazz Piano Skills online community, which hosts a variety of engaging forums. And finally, your Jazz Piano Skills membership grants you unlimited private, personal, and professional educational support whenever and as often as you need it. All of these amazing privileges are waiting to help you discover, learn, and play jazz piano. So check it all out when you have a second. Check it out at jazzpianoskills.com. And, of course, become a member to enjoy premium podcast content, plus all of the other privileges I just mentioned. Of course, if you have any questions, once you poke around on the site, any questions, please contact me. I'm happy to spend some time with you and answer any questions that you may have. Speaking of questions, it's time for the question of the week, one of my favorite segments. I received this question actually several weeks ago, at least a few weeks ago, and I saved it for today because it syncs up beautifully with today's podcast episode. So Adam Ligner, check this out, from Athens, Greece. Adam, love it, man. Adam writes, I've been studying jazz piano for around 5 years and love it. However, 5 years into my journey, and I feel more overwhelmed than ever with the amount of information and material that I need to practice. As a result, I feel I now have a scattershot approach to practicing. Is there any kind of outline you know of or you can provide that will help me establish an organized and effective practice agenda? Thanks for considering my question. I appreciate all that you do. Well, Adam, you have hit the nail on the head. Honestly, this has been the problem with jazz education for as long as I can remember. There is so much information available, more than ever, especially with the onslaught of the internet. Heck, I feel like you currently do. I felt like you currently do back in the 70s and 80s when I was searching for information and materials to help me develop my jazz skills. It seemed like that time there was an endless number of books available, and that was just what you could find in the Jamie Aebersold catalog. And on top of that, there was no way to determine which one of the books in the Jamie Aebersold catalog, which ones I should use. And if I could determine a grouping of books to use, there was no easy way for me to determine an order in which I should study them. What a dilemma. So typically, what would happen back in those days, for all of us wanting to improve our jazz playing, we would simply purchase as many books as we could. We'd have a library of books, man. We would buy any book that we could and begin to somehow try to piece the information together in a meaningful way that would hopefully improve our practicing, which in turn would improve our jazz piano playing. In hindsight, it was not a good plan. It wasn't a good plan financially because we were buying anything we can get our hands on. And it certainly wasn't a good plan educationally, right? Not a good strategy. So today, we still have the Jamie Aebersold catalog, which is packed with excellent resources. And many other music publishing companies now are offering an entire catalog of jazz education materials. Plus, we have this relatively new phenomenon called the internet, which honestly could also be called the black hole of jazz, right? There is so much information, right? A lot of great information, and of course, a lot of not so great information, which of course makes it even more challenging than ever to sift through and determine what to use, how to use it, and when to use it. So, Adam, I think the very best advice I can give you is to think about your study and practice approach in 3 categories. Number 1, harmony. Number 2, melody. Number 3, improvisation. And all 3 of those, of course, include rhythmic aspects of music as well. So we have harmony, melody, improvisation. We all need to answer the following questions. Number 1, what harmonic skills am I practicing weekly and how and why? Number 2, what melodic skills am I practicing weekly and how and why? And number 3, what improvisation skills am I practicing weekly and how and why? Now, of course, answering these questions becomes much easier if you actually know the harmonic, melodic, and improvisational skills that you should be practicing, right? That's where I come in. And guess what? We are doing that today. We're doing exactly that, answering those questions. This is why I have been hanging on to your question, Adam, for a few weeks, because it leads perfectly into the topic of today's podcast episode, which presents what I like to call jazz standards, a DLP synopsis, discover, learn, play synopsis, which I could have very easily called a practice agenda synopsis, which of course does not sound nearly as fun. So you got to be aware of these things, right? You got to title things in a fun way. So Adam, today is a huge episode for you. Hopefully a huge episode for all of us. And after listening to this episode, your, as you put it, scattershot approach to practicing will be a thing of the past. I'm pumped up. So let's get started. Let's discover, learn, and play jazz piano. Let's dig into jazz standards, a DLP synopsis. So let's begin by talking about studying jazz standards, right? Before we begin constructing a DLP synopsis. So since the beginning of the year, I have presented, I think, in just about every episode, my outline for studying and learning jazz standards. If you can't remember, here's a quick refresher. Number 1, listen. Number 2, determine form. Number 3, learn chords, voicings. Number 4, learn melody, treatments. Number 5, explore improvisation approaches, right? Listen, determine form, learn chords, voicings, learn melody, treatments, explore improvisation approaches. That's it, right? Nothing more, nothing less. Those 5 steps. Steps 1 and 2 and 3 deal with harmonic analysis, form, chord changes, harmonic function, voicings. Step 4 focuses on melodic analysis, transcribing a melody, learning the melody by ear, in other words, using guide tones, fingerings for proper articulation, and determination of phrases, using lyrics, target note awareness for improvisation prep, treatments for time and feel development, right? A lot goes into that melodic analysis. And step 5, right, exploring improvisation approaches, right, uses common tones, neighboring harmonic zones, and melodic patterns using half-step approaches for motif development and tension, right? So, again, step 1, 2, and 3 deal with harmonic analysis. That's listen, determine form, learn chords and voicings. Step 4 focuses on melodic analysis, which is learn the melody and various treatments. And step 5 explores improvisation development, right, using common chord tones, harmonic zones, patterns, and motifs, tension. Right, our goal has been and will always be to keep our study of jazz standards, right, really clean and tidy, as I like to say. Actually, this is our goal with all things we do musically. Whether it is a skill study or a tune study, makes no difference. Clean, tidy, structured, and simple, right? That's how we begin with our conceptual understanding. We want it to be clean, tidy, structured, and simple. Y'all can attest to the fact that I say it many times over and over the past 4 years, that if your conceptual understanding of music or any musical skill is not clean, tidy, structured, simple, it is then unorganized, confusing, fragmented, and frustrating. And if it is unorganized, confusing, fragmented, and frustrating, and confusing conceptually upstairs, you have no shot. I mean, zero shot of executing it in your hands downstairs on the piano. That's just the brutal facts. 100% truth. So the educational agenda for today is as follows. Number 1, we're going to hit the pause button, so to speak, to reflect upon our tune study efforts since the beginning of the year. Number 2, we're going to answer the important questions of what harmonic skills am I practicing weekly, right? How and why? What melodic skills am I practicing weekly? How and why? What improvisation skills am I practicing weekly? How and why? And number 3, and in doing so, right, we're going to construct a concise yet thorough outline, synopsis of the jazz piano skills needed to successfully discover, learn, and play jazz standards. To successfully discover, learn, and play jazz piano, period. Wow. How cool is this going to be today? Now, typically, I do not develop podcast packets for a lecture series episode like today. But I'm literally on the spot thinking I should do that today, and I will. I do not have them developed right now as I'm recording this podcast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish recording this podcast, publish this podcast, and then work on the podcast packets. So what that means is that when you get this episode and you immediately go to download the podcast packets and they are not there instantly, please do not be sending me emails or text messages. Where's my podcast packets? I'm speaking up to some specific individuals here, and you know who I'm talking about. You know who you are. So anyway, I think it's a good idea that I do some podcast packets for this episode. So we have this synopsis in writing that we're going to construct today. Plus, I'll have some play-along backing tracks to practice with as well, and some lead sheets that kind of illustrate what I'm going to demonstrate today in playing. So if you are a Jazz Piano Skills member, you will be able to access those podcast packets. That your membership grants you access to the premium content for every weekly podcast episode, right? Which includes all the podcast packets, not only for today, but for every week, past, current, and future, right? And as I say all the time that you should have these podcast packets in your hands when listening to the podcast packet. And of course, you should have them on your piano when practicing. So if you are listening to this podcast on any of the popular podcast directories, such as Apple or Google, Spotify, there's a million of them, right? iHeartRadio, Amazon, Pandora, then I suggest going directly to jazzpianoskillspodcast.com, and you will find the active download links for each of the podcast packets in the show notes. Or you can log in to your Jazz Piano Skills account and from your dashboard navigate to this episode, where you will find one convenient link to download all 3 podcast packets in one bundle, right? It's nice. Okay, so let's get after this synopsis that we're going to construct today. Okay, I mentioned earlier that we have 3 questions that we need to look at and we need to answer. And question number 1, what harmonic skills am I practicing weekly? How and why? So let's begin with that question. Harmonic analysis. Every week when we look at a new tune, thank you for listening to Jazz Piano Skills. The remaining premium content of this episode is available to Jazz Piano Skills members at jazzpianoskillspodcast.com. Visit jazzpianoskills.com to learn more about membership privileges and become a Jazz Piano Skills member. Thank you.